Bonjour, good day. I'm George Zagaric, the Deputy Minister of Education. There are many things competing for our attention, so allow me to thank those of you taking the time to learn about the 2015-16 Grants for Student Needs. The GSN changes you will hear about over the course of this presentation reflect the consultations and discussions undertaken with our partners in education, partners like you. We very much appreciate the collaborative approach demonstrated by the sector in addressing some of our most pressing challenges. Our efforts will continue to improve quality in our schools as we work towards realizing the goals of achieving excellence and taking our publicly funded education system from great to excellent. Thank you for your dedication and your hard work on behalf of the Ontario students and their families. Now I'll turn it over to the Minister of Education, the Honourable Liz Sandals.
Thank you for joining us. Today, the Ministry of Education is releasing the 2015-16 Grants for Student Needs, as well as updates to the Pupil Accommodation Review Guideline and the Facility Partnership Guideline. Before Assistant Deputy Minister Gabrielle Sakali gets to the details of the changes this year, I wanted to take a moment to recognize all of our partners for their hard work and dedication to Ontario students and improving quality in our education system. Each year, it seems we are building on success. Together, we have transformed Ontario's education system into one of the best in the world. Now we are aiming even higher. That is why, as a sector, we laid out a renewed vision for education and challenged ourselves to accomplish 4 goals: achieving excellence, ensuring equity, promoting well-being, and enhancing public confidence. I see the vision as a promise to students, families, and communities of a publicly funded education system that will continue to improve in quality and move from great to excellent. Getting there will demand innovation, dedication, and partnership. It will also require an education system that is sustainable, modern, and efficient. To that last point, your input has been invaluable. The challenges you are experiencing with declining enrollment and the cost of maintaining underutilized space are important considerations for the sustainability of our education system. To put it simply, we can no longer afford to fund underutilized space at the expense of supporting student achievement and well-being. Thanks to your feedback, this year's education budget is more focused than ever on directly supporting students and their experience in the classroom. This year, we are rising to the challenge of making the most efficient use of school space, both through school consolidations and new community partnerships. Together, we are laying the foundation for success in realizing the goals of achieving excellence. Thank you for your dedication to Ontario students and for your hard work improving the quality and sustainability of our publicly funded education system. Assistant Deputy Minister Gabrielle Sakali will now provide you with the details of the 2015-16 GSN. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Sandals, and thank you, George, for your introduction. As you can tell, this year we are trying a new approach to sharing with you the details of next school year's Grants for Student Needs. As opposed to a live webcast, we have produced this video announcement. In addition to responding to questions you send in via email and posting our answers online, we will be meeting with directors and senior business officials at upcoming regional meetings to discuss this year's GSN. This approach will provide you more time to digest the changes in the GSN and read the technical document so that we can continue our constructive dialogue on funding. So now on to the presentation of the 2015-16 Grants for Student Needs. This is the 5th year that I've had the privilege and honor of addressing you. As in previous years, the goal today is to give an overview of the changes to the funding formula for the next school year, starting on September the 1st, 2015. Today we are releasing a multitude of information, including the Grants for Student Needs Funding B Memo, an EPO Funding B Memo, the technical paper, board-by-board funding projections, a B Memo outlining changes to the Pupil Accommodation Review Guideline and the Facilities Partnership Guideline, and an SB Memo outlining changes to School Condition Improvement Funding Program. There will be more information about these and other resource documents later in this presentation. Please note that a regulation to govern grants to school boards in their 15-16 fiscal year has not yet been made. The Ministry intends to seek such a regulation, which is subject to the approval of the Lieutenant Governor and Council, and we will advise you if it is made. I'm pleased to announce that in 2015-16, GSN funding is projected to be stable year over year at almost $22.5 billion. This continued stability means that the sector can continue to make progress on the gains made in education over the past decade. Higher student achievement, more high school graduates, and the implementation of full-day kindergarten, to name but just a few. These are achievements the government has also committed to build on through Achieving Excellence, a renewed vision for education in Ontario. At the same time, the 2015-16 GSN recognizes that this is a time when we have to look at how best to use and maximize the value of current resources rather than anticipate major new investments. So the funding formula continues to be dynamic and to evolve in the direction of promoting greater efficiency. As you will hear, the 2015-16 GSN includes a strong focus on our school board efficiencies and modernization strategy, which we launched last year. This year, we are introducing further structural reforms to focus resources even more on what we need to achieve. Consistent with our renewed vision for education in Ontario, education funding has to be aligned with more than academic achievement. It also has to recognize the need to close gaps and to support programs to close those gaps so that all students benefit from a strong educational system that allows all students to achieve their full potential. That means that one of the challenges as we move forward is the need to better align funding with the aims of Achieving Excellence. Just as Achieving Excellence was developed by the Ministry through extensive consultations with its partners, so we remain committed to consulting with you and others about education funding on an ongoing basis. 2 years ago, we started to revitalize the process of annual GSN consultations with our partners in the education sector. That included a focus on discussing potential changes to the GSN to better align the formula with board cost structures, drive efficiencies, and support our common vision for education. Our consultations a year ago on school board efficiencies and modernization was a real step forward in that process. As part of that renewed commitment to consultation, we published a summary of what we heard during these consultations, and this year we are once again making available on our website the summary of this year's consultations. I am pleased to say that our fall 2014 consultations were equally productive and helpful. The Ministry again wishes to thank all who participated. The 2015-16 GSN is projected to be about $22.5 billion. That is essentially the same total allocation as the current year. On a per-pupil basis, that level of funding translates into a projected province-wide average of $11,451 per student. That is $25 more per pupil than in 2014-15. It is important to remember that this stability and funding stands upon a decade of significant investments by the province in public education. Total operating funding has increased by $8 billion, or 56% since 2002-03. On a per-pupil basis, the increase is, in percentage terms, even greater, 59% more per pupil. That reflects a second significant trend since 2002-03, that of declining enrollment. As we look toward the 2015-16 school year, we can see that those trends are starting to change. Funding growth has been curtailed. As with all areas of the public sector, program funding in the education sector will need to be managed very carefully if the province is to achieve its target of balancing the budget by 2017-18. Enrollment is projected to rise slowly province-wide, even after the full impact associated with the implementation of full-day kindergarten is factored in. This enrollment increase, it is important to say, will not be uniformly distributed, as many areas of the province will continue to experience declines in enrollment. Let me now turn to the specific changes that impact the total GSN allocation for 2015-16. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, the Ministry conducted extensive consultations with a broad range of stakeholders, including many of you in 2013 and 2014. In 2014, we met with every school board as part of the regional symposia organized by the Ministry of Education. As you know, the purpose of these consultations was to collaboratively develop a strategy to better focus our financial resources in order to drive our renewed vision while achieving fiscal sustainability over the long term. The key theme to emerge from these consultations was that there continues to be an opportunity to make better, more efficient use of school space. We were also clearly told that change in this area, by its very nature, takes time and needs to be supported by capital funding and other supports. Based on your feedback, we launched SPEM in 2014-15 and articulated a 5-pillar strategy that includes significant capital investments, improvements to processes, and changes to grants to provide incentives to boards to make more efficient use of school space. With respect to the capital investments, the government announced $750 million over 4 years to support school consolidations and right-sizing of school facilities. The first round of projects was announced a few weeks ago. The improvements include a revision to the Pupil Accommodation Review Guideline, or PARG, to enable boards to more effectively review their facilities, which I will be providing more detail on shortly. And the changes to grants resulted in estimated net savings of $18.6 million in the 2014-15 school year. There is still further progress to be made. That is why the plan for 2015-16 is to broaden the SPEM initiative with additional measures designed to encourage more efficient use of school space and further modernizations to update the funding formula. At the same time, these changes will maintain and in some cases improve supports for the schools that need it most. To respond to your feedback that right-sizing school space and adjusting cost structures takes time, most of these SPEM measures will be phased in over the next 3 years, with the objective of fully phasing in changes by the 2017-18 school year. This year, 2/3 of the funding will be generated by the 2014-15 allocation methodology, and 1/3 will be generated by the new allocation methodology that I will describe in a moment. This will result in $58.6 million in estimated net savings in the 2015-16 school year. The first change I'd like to highlight is the elimination of base top-up funding in the School Facility Operations and Renewal Grant. As you know, top-up is funding to support the operation and maintenance of facilities where enrollment is less than capacity. It directly supports underutilized space. In some cases, base top-up support is allowing school boards to keep schools open where it would make more sense in terms of program or in terms of fiscal, demographic, or geographic factors to rationalize school space through measures that might include consolidation or closure. That is why, beginning in 2015-16, base top-up will be phased out, with a portion of the funding released in each year of the phase-out reinvested in per-pupil operating and cost benchmarks of the School Facility Operations and Renewal Grant. This realignment will provide school boards with a stronger incentive to optimize their cost structure and capital footprint, since underutilized space would no longer generate funding in non-isolated schools. The reinvestment through the benchmarks, details of these changes will be found in the B memo and technical paper, is intended to redirect funding from underutilized space to serve pupils in all schools across the province. It is in this way that the formula is now emphasizing the need to fund the students we have in the system. It is important to note that the elimination of base top-up will not affect all schools, however. We recognize that some school boards require enhanced top-up funding support to operate and maintain schools in distant or isolated areas. To ensure that funding goes to where it is most needed, the Ministry will phase in new distance criteria to determine eligibility for enhanced top-up. Under this new approach, any elementary school facility that is at least 10 kilometers away from the next closest school facility, whether elementary or secondary, will qualify for enhanced top-up, as will any secondary school facility that is at least 20 kilometers away from the nearest secondary school facility. At the same time, some current eligibility criteria, specifically whether a school facility is part of a supported school or qualifies as rural, will be phased out as we phase in the new criteria. Another key change being introduced this year is the recalibration of the School Foundation Grant into a three-tiered allocation, providing individuated funding based on distance for supported, distant, and regular schools. This change is designed to increase incentives for school boards to operate more efficient schools where possible. While both large and small schools can be effective in fostering student success and well-being, efficiencies of scale make larger or combined schools more cost-effective to operate. When resources are scarce, it makes sense to encourage boards to operate larger schools where appropriate. Of course, this is not always possible in rural or remote areas of the province, and the funding is now designed to recognize that distinction. At the same time, there are new investments being phased in to support school leadership in remote, combined elementary-secondary, and large secondary schools. In fact, the overall impact of the changes to the School Foundation Grant is a net investment of $1.3 million in 2015-16. In 2015-16, the Ministry will also begin phasing in changes to bring the underlying data and concepts in the Geographic Circumstances Grant up to date. To begin with, the remote and rural allocation will be updated to reflect more up-to-date geographic data, including road networks, population data, and urban centers with a population of at least 200,000. In fact, the number of urban centers will increase from 5 to 10. The new urban centers are Brampton, Kitchener, Mississauga, Markham, and Vaughan. As the Ministry has both made investments and put in place protections for boards and schools in rural and remote communities, a decision has been made to phase out the rural and small communities allocation as part of a balanced overall package of changes. And building on last year's investment in combined supported schools, additional changes will be made to the supported schools allocation to better align funding with the Pupil Foundation Grant. This will eliminate duplicative funding for schools that already generate sufficient funding for teachers through the Pupil Foundation Grant, that is, funding for 7.5 or more elementary teachers or 14 or more secondary teachers. Finally, 2015-16 will see the full implementation of changes to the declining enrollment adjustment, which is already designed to phase in the impacts of enrollment declines. As you know, the Declining Enrollment Adjustment Grant has provided funding since 2002-03 to mitigate the impact on school board revenues when enrollment is declining. As such, some of the components of the Declining Enrollment Adjustment will be reduced to encourage school boards to adjust more quickly to declines in their enrollment. As in previous years, the cost benchmark for the Student Transportation Grant is being increased by 2%, to recognize higher operating costs. This increase will again be netted against the board's transportation surplus. Similarly, the cost benchmark for the non-staff portion of the school operations allocation will again be increased by 2% to help boards manage the increases in commodity prices, like natural gas, as well as facility insurance and other costs. There will also be increased funding for electricity costs based on the 7.3% increase in the Ministry of Energy's most recent long-term energy plan. At the same time, there are some changes in the works for the Transportation Grant. Beginning in 2015-16, transportation services for residential students at English language provincial and demonstration schools will be delivered by the Ministry's Provincial Schools Branch. Starting in 2015-16, the Ministry will work with school boards and transportation consortia to begin collecting and analyzing data through available technology to better understand student transportation delivery in Ontario. Further information will be provided in the near future. In 2014-15, the Ministry began phasing in a new allocation method for the School Board Administration and Governance Grant, as recommended by the School Board Administration and Governance Advisory Group. 2015-16 is the second year of the 4-year phase-in, which will be fully implemented in 17-18. Under the new model, 3 of the grant's allocations, the Directors and Supervisory Officers allocation, the Board Administration allocation, and the Multiple Municipalities allocation will become a single Board Administration allocation made up of 10 core functions. The remaining allocations in the grant are unaffected. In 2015-16, 50% of the funding to boards is being generated using the 2013-14 allocation model, while the remaining 50% will be allocated by applying the new model parameters. In 2014-15, after extensive consultations with stakeholder representatives, including the Special Education Funding Working Group, the Ministry began the 4-year implementation of a new High Needs Amount or HNA funding model. This change to the HNA allocation will provide greater fairness and equity, as the new allocation methodology will better reflect the variation among boards with respect to students with special education needs and the board's abilities to meet those needs. In 2015-16, implementation of the new allocation model will continue, with the current total funding level maintained to provide stability. During this year's consultations, the Ministry discussed with stakeholders the intention to review the Learning Opportunities Grant, or LOG, and the Safe and Accepting Schools Supplement to determine if stronger accountability mechanisms were required to ensure that funding is meeting provincial policy objectives. Drawing on the feedback we received, in 2015-16, the Ministry will be introducing new but measured accountability mechanisms for the Learning Opportunities Grant and the Safe and Accepting Schools Supplement. For LOG, 6 of the smaller allocations will be collectively enveloped as a group. I'd like to note that the envelope applies to the sum of the 6 allocations, not to each allocation separately. This provides some flexibility in how boards may use the individual allocations. It is also important to note that current program or evaluation reporting requirements specific to any of these 6 allocations will continue. For the Safe and Accepting Schools Supplement, a new data form will be added to the Education Financial Information System to monitor expenditures. The form will ask boards to report on expenditures on programs for long-term suspended and expelled students, including prevention and intervention activities. The Ministry will also be taking measures in the coming school year to ensure that school boards are complying with existing accountability rules and regulations. In 2015-16, the Ministry will be reviewing board compliance with the requirement that a board's net administration and governance expenses not exceed its administration and governance limit. And the Ministry may also take action, including cash withholdings, in cases where boards' FDK and grades 1 to 3 classes are not in compliance with class size regulations for 2 years in a row, beginning with the 14-15 results. To facilitate school boards' budget planning for the 2015-16 school year, the Ministry is also pleased to announce that it will allocate more than $180 million in funding through Education Program Other, EPO, to school boards and school authorities, in addition to the funding provided through the GSN. This year's EPO funding is allocated to support our core goals as identified in Achieving Excellence. Transforming the education system and realizing our shared goals for achieving excellence while living within our means requires commitment and determination. The EPO funding aligns with transformational priorities, provides new approaches that create flexibility for school boards in how they allocate those funds, and includes improved reporting processes. Negotiations towards new labor agreements are ongoing. Under the statutory freeze provisions of Ontario's Labour Relations Act, existing terms and conditions of employment, unless specifically time-limited in the previous collective agreements, continue into the 2015-16 school year. As in 2014-15, GSN funding for compensation and other labour costs in 2015-16 will reflect the current situation under the statutory freeze. When negotiations result in new collective agreements, the Ministry will seek the approval of the Lieutenant Governor and Council regarding any necessary amendments to the GSN. Under the School Board's Collective Bargaining Act, trustee associations are the statutory employer bargaining agents for school boards in central negotiations with teacher federations and education worker unions. In recognition of this role, and beginning in 2015-16, boards will be provided with funding necessary to support the labor relations activities of their respective trustees associations. A fees regulation under the School Board's Collective Bargaining Act is planned to be issued that would make the payment of the labor relations fees mandatory. The funding to pay these fees will be provided through the School Board Administration and Governance Grant. Trustees associations will use these fees solely for the purpose of labor relations activities. Finally, as every year, the Ministry has established due dates for the submission of financial reports. All these dates are in the B memo. The most immediate date is June 30th, 2015, for the submission of your board's 2015-16 estimates. In March 2014, the government announced a 3-year, $1.25 billion school condition improvement investment. This year marks the second year of this investment, and we are doubling funding to $500 million. SCI funding is intended to help boards address the renewal needs identified from the data collected through the Ministry's 5-year condition assessment program, which began in 2011. A further $500 million in funding will be allocated to boards in 2016-17. It is important to note that the Ministry is changing the funding approach for school condition improvement funding starting in 2015-16. SCI funding will now be allocated in proportion to a board's total assessed renewal needs as determined through the Condition Assessment Program. Beginning in 2015-16, school boards will be required to direct 80% of SCI funding to critical building components such as foundations and roofs, and to systems such as HVAC. School boards will be allowed to use the remaining 20% of their SCI funding to address any locally identified renewal needs. Additional details about the changes we are making to the School Condition Improvement Program will be provided today in an SB memo. In 2014, the Ministry of Education's Capital Advisory Committee, the CAC, consisting of 15 school board representatives from across the province, reviewed the existing Pupil Accommodation Review Guideline. The goal was to recommend changes to provide school boards with a more flexible tool to address underutilized school space when undertaking pupil accommodation reviews, while still ensuring communities have the opportunity to provide meaningful input. The CAC then provided recommendations on potential revisions to the PARG to the Ministry of Education for further consideration. The 5 key issues identified by the CAC to enable school boards to have a more effective process to undertake pupil accommodation reviews were 1. More focus on students' achievement and well-being, 2. More clarity on community expectations of the public consultation process, 3. A less contentious process that is reflected in the role of the Accommodation Review Committee, 4. A more flexible process to address local circumstances, and 5. More municipal school board planning to address long-term excess space. In late 2014 and early 2015, the Ministry consulted on the CAC's recommendations with education sector stakeholders, including trustee associations, senior school board officials, parent groups, student groups, teacher federations, education worker unions, municipal sector representatives, and administrative review facilitators. The consultation feedback identified several areas where the PARG could be strengthened to better support the pupil accommodation review process. The Ministry of Education has made several revisions to the PARG based on this feedback. I will now highlight the main areas of change to the PARG to address the key issues identified previously. PARG guiding principles have been added, those being student well-being, academic achievement, and school board viability and sustainability. A requirement has been added that after the pupil accommodation review process has started, school boards must seek feedback from their local municipal governments and other community partners. The role of the ARC has been refocused as a conduit for information sharing with no requirement for voting on a final recommendation. ARC membership, at a minimum, is to include parent or guardian representatives from the schools under review. And finally, there is an optional modified pupil accommodation review process to address local circumstances. The PARG continues to represent a framework of minimum standards for school boards to consider in their accommodation review policies. School boards are expected to amend their existing policies to reflect the revised PARG before starting any new pupil accommodation reviews. In conjunction with the changes to the Pupil Accommodation Review Guideline, the Ministry has revised the Facilities Partnership Guideline to ensure synergy between both guidelines. The Facility Partnership Guideline has now been renamed the Community Planning and Partnerships Guideline, or CPP Guideline, to reflect a broader objective and function. The Ministry recognizes that school boards have and continue to form successful facility partnerships with their municipalities and other community organizations. However, we are also aware of some of the challenges some school boards have experienced with respect to exchanging planning information with entities like municipalities and other community organizations. Where the opportunity exists, the effective exchange of information supports a smoother development process for facility partnerships, green space, and parkland plans. As a result, the existing annual meeting requirements in the guideline has been strengthened. Specifically, the CPP guideline now requires school boards to exchange planning information with municipalities and community entities on facility partnership opportunities, community needs, green space, and parkland needs during the annual meeting. In addition, the CPP guideline now also requires boards to ensure that additional efforts are made to share this information with community organizations prior to commencing a pupil accommodation review. You will also notice that the CPP guideline has also been directly linked to the revised Pupil Accommodation Review Guideline. In 2015-16, the Ministry continues to provide funding for capital projects through two main programs. The first program is the Capital Priorities Grant, whereby the Ministry requests that school boards submit their updated capital priority requests annually. Funding will be focused on boards' most urgent and pressing projects needed to address accommodation pressures, poor facility condition, support the implementation of accommodation review decisions to close or consolidate schools, or provide accommodation for French language rights holders. Since 2010, the Ministry has allocated over $2.9 billion in capital funding for the construction of new schools, permanent additions, renovations, and school purchases, including 78 capital priority projects worth over $700 million in 2014. In the last round of capital priorities, we received 265 requests for capital priorities totaling over $2.7 billion. The Ministry will be requesting boards to revise and update their capital priorities requests and submit these requests later this spring, with announcements being planned for the autumn of 2015. Stay tuned for additional information. The second major program is the School Consolidation Capital SCC grant that was announced as part of the 2014-15 Grants for Student Needs. As you will recall, the Ministry announced a total investment of $750 million over 4 years for this program. SCC funding is intended to help school boards adjust their cost structure in response to reductions in Ministry funding that currently supports empty space. School boards were invited to submit trustee-approved business cases demonstrating a reduction of excess space in October 2014. School boards across the province submitted 79 projects worth approximately $660 million for funding consideration under the first round of the program. The Ministry is supporting 31 projects totaling approximately $150 million in SCC and new full-day kindergarten funding as a result of the review of the business cases submitted. With the introduction of the SCC grant program and the continuation of the regular Capital Priorities grant program, school boards will now have the opportunity to submit business cases for their most urgent school consolidation projects twice a year. The Ministry is conducting pilot school consolidation experience studies as part of an effort to work with administrators, teachers, parents, students, and other members of the school community to better understand stakeholder experiences with pupil accommodation decisions, specifically school closures and consolidations. The Ministry is aware that many stakeholders worry about how a transition to a new or reorganized school will impact them. The SCES will provide an opportunity for lessons learned with respect to school closures and consolidations that will be shared across the province when the results are released later in 2015. As part of the 2015-16 GSN consultations, the Ministry heard that using eligible excess school space as a community resource is an important element in the creation of a strong, vibrant, and sustainable education system. The Ontario government has identified community hubs as an important priority for the province. There is great potential for communities to benefit from existing public spaces that could be used for coordinated delivery of education, social, and health services. The government has appointed Karen Petrie as Special Advisor to the Premier on community hubs. She will chair an advisory group that will conduct consultations, review provincial policies, evaluate existing inventory, and develop a strategic framework which will include working across sectors and through partnerships to enhance the use of community assets. As this work unfolds, and to support community hubs, the Ministry is prepared to make funding and other resources available to assist school boards with retrofitting and modifying facilities where a viable community hub partner has been identified. The Ministry will continue to work with education stakeholders and other ministries to support this important initiative. In April and early May, the Ministry will hold regional information sessions for school board officials. These sessions will be an opportunity for the Ministry to hear questions and feedback from school boards, but also for us to collectively review current and future challenges. We must continue to look for best practices in managing resources and continue to work collaboratively to develop future strategies for greater efficiencies and savings. While the changes introduced this year are significant, we will need to continue the conversation about how to achieve even further savings options going forward. The Ministry is committed to continuing to work collaboratively with you to develop future strategies for greater efficiency and savings. Together, we will sustain Ontario's achievements in education while contributing to the important goal of a balanced provincial budget in 2017-18. Thank you. I hope this presentation has been helpful and informative. As you well know, there is much more detail about GSN funding than can be covered in this presentation. Please visit the Ministry's website for additional information. If you have any questions, these can be sent to us at the email address fpbd-dpfo@ontario.ca. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. I hope that you have found it informative, and I look forward to seeing many of you in the months to come.